You know, it's my great pleasure right now to introduce to everybody a man who really needs no introduction.
Karl Dragon King.
I'm not calling the fans geeks. I'm not calling them rednecks, tobacco chewing nothing, because I've done all that myself.
Karl Dragon King. Karl.
In your dreams, you will see me. Excuse me, please, let's don't talk negatively. I'm going to win the title, I'm going to keep my money and buy me some good old Tennessee drinking whiskey with it.
Thank you for being such a great husband.
And this is for you, Fannie Mae. Solid gold, baby, just like you and me.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the 1,000 Hours podcast from the Dragon King Karl Classic Wrestling audio show, produced and distributed by WhenItWasCool.com, heard at Figure4Online.com, WrestlingObserver.com, and certainly want to invite you to WhenItWasCool.com. We've had a real resurgence here lately. A lot of great things happening over there. This show is all about the pioneer era of pro wrestling, and I thank you very much for joining us. This show is a sponsored show, and you can sponsor an episode of this podcast simply by becoming a Patreon supporter at When It Was Cool. If you do that, we'll show you as the sponsor for another episode of this podcast. You help keep it going. If you're already a Patreon supporter, or you just don't want to sign up Patreon or whatever, you can directly donate for 1,000 hours or any reason really to our website. The links to PayPal and Cash App are on the front page, and we really appreciate that. This episode, hour number 78 of 1,000 Hours, is brought to you by Michael R. Michael R. sponsored an hour of this show, so we're going to do that today. And I have to say, I'm very happy to announce that we are now sponsored through episode 100. Andy Cohen, one of the great foundational Patreon supporters at When It Was Cool, has sponsored episode number 100. So we're up to there. Don't let that deter you, though, because if you become a Patreon supporter at When It Was Cool, we have over 2,000, right at 3,000 podcasts in our archive dealing with not just pro wrestling history, but pop culture and retro pop culture as well, movie reviews. It's a wonderful community. It's a wonderful, very fun, very active community. Hope you'll check us out, WhenItWasCool.com. So we're going to pick up in the 1880s, the end of 1880, December of 1880. Last episode was unique in that we didn't just go through my Pioneer Era book, which is what we're doing right now. Is going. It's essentially the audio book with additional commentary for a little while here on the show. And the book is, of course, Dragon King Karl's Pioneer Era Pro Wrestling Omnibus. It's almost 700 pages of just about the Pioneer Era of pro wrestling, professional wrestling before Frank Gotch, professional wrestling before the year 1900. And look, hey, we've had a good couple months on the book sales. Book sales have held much stronger than I expected, and so I'm very happy for that. But you can check it out at Amazon. It's on Kindle, Kindle Unlimited. Check it out wherever you can. There's even a PDF available if you're at the $10 Patreon level. And so we're 51% through the book right now. So that's pretty solid. We're about halfway done. And we're going to pick up December of 1880. Remember on last episode we were talking a little bit, while that episode was about why we should study the Pioneer Era of wrestling, we did a little bit of the timeline. And if you remember, John McMahon had claimed to be wrestling somebody in claimed to be wrestling somebody who was actually on the other side of the country, and we found out that he had false advertised somebody's name. They were actually at a blacksmith shop, I think, and I believe we're going to learn more about that as well. But we pick up on December 3rd, 1880, at Fall River, Massachusetts, at the Academy of Music. H.M. Duffer defeated Duncan C. Ross in a mixed-style match, 3 out of 5 falls. H.M. Duffer won the 2 collar and elbow falls, while Duncan C. Ross won the 2 catch-as-catch-can falls. And Duffer won the 1 side hold rules fall. So there was one that had a little bit of a different rule set there, and that was common back in this time period. H.M. Duffer claimed the championship belt and the title of American Collar and Elbow Champion, which had been disputed for some time. Now only John McMahon is still claiming the American Collar and Elbow Championship besides H.M. Dufer. On December 20th, 1880, in Providence, Rhode Island, Infantry Hall, Duncan C. Ross defeated Captain J.C. Daly by disqualification or referee stoppage. It was a mixed styles match, and it broke down into a brawl. Now, these two worked together a lot, but they did seem to fight a lot. Like they would seem, and I don't know if this was part of their act, they were kayfabing people, or what was called back then doing a put-up job, or hippodroning a match is what they called it back in that time period. But a few of their matches, at least a couple of them, broke down into fights. So even though Duncan C. Ross and Captain J.C. Daly seemed to be cohorts and part of the same troop and all that, their matches got a little wild sometimes. After swapping falls, Daly became enraged at the referee, Mike Gillespie, and struck him. Yeah, hit the referee. This may be I don't know this for sure. Of course, there's who knows, but this is the earliest documented evidence I have of a ref bump. So, do with that as you may. And again, I'm not saying this for certain was a hippodromed or worked match. There's a strong likelihood. I would put the likelihood at better than 75% that it was, and that this was part of the deal. But Ross then charged at Daly and began fighting with him in like a real fist fight. The match managed to resume, but once Daly had Ross down, he began hitting him with his fist, and then the police intervened and stopped the match. So that's interesting. It was either a really good angle for 1880 or this, J.C. Daly and Duncan C. Ross barely got along, and sometimes their matches just broke down. And I'm honestly not sure which of the two it is. With a lot of these guys, you can kind of get a read on it. With these two, I suspect it was work. I suspect it was, but it's just my opinion, and yours may differ, and that's fine too. I have no real solid, tangible evidence to base that on, just a suspicion. December 21st, 1880, in Brooklyn, New York, at the Rink, Greco-Roman rules, Edwin Bibby wrestled Clarence Whistler to a 4-hour and 50-minute draw. So we haven't talked a lot about Clarence Whistler up to this point, and he is well on his way to becoming he will eventually become considered by the newspapers the best wrestler in the world. In fact, multiple newspapers are, in a few years they're discussing, hey, William Muldoon's been injured. He's kind of slowed down a little bit. So has John McMahon. Colonel McLaughlin's retired and gone to the railroad. Like, who is the best wrestler in the world? And many of them agreed that it was Clarence Whistler. The only problem is Clarence Whistler had been dead for 2 weeks down in Australia. It took a while for the news to reach back to the United States. So very, very interesting. Now then, we're about to have a major death in pro wrestling, one of the early deaths of a champion. In fact, this may be let me think. By this point, we've had several American heavyweight champions. We've had, well, no, it wouldn't be because Oozle Prickett was murdered. So that's one down. So he's probably the second American champion to pass away, would be James Owens. All right, so we go to December 23rd, 1880, and we go to the Cleveland Leader. And they run an article stating that the pending wrestling match between the former American champion James Owens and John Rabshaw had been postponed as Owens has quickly come down with a severe sickness. December 24th, 1880, James Jim Owens dies in Fairfield, Vermont from severe bronchial illness. He had taken ill in Cleveland, Ohio, while preparing to wrestle John Rabshaw. And here I have a Dragon King Karl note. The death of James Jim Owens was a shock for wrestling at the time. Jim Owens' death came about quickly as he was in Cleveland, Ohio, training for an upcoming match with John Rabshaw. If the 1850 date of birth is correct for Owens, then he is only around 30 years old at this point. And look, we've said a lot. James Jim Owens was not a really good wrestling champion. He was nothing in the league. His title, I shouldn't say nothing in the league. We don't know really truly how skilled these people were. No videotape exists. No firsthand eyewitnesses exist anymore. I can only go by the old newspaper accounts and draw conclusions based on that. who knows if you really put Colonel James H. McLaughlin and James Owens in a barn in 1870 something, who would really win in a real true match? We just don't know. It's no different than speculating about today's wrestling world, Even though I don't think a lot of that goes on anymore. I don't know, and perhaps I'm wrong here. This is just speculation on fun, what if on my part. But when I was growing up watching wrestling in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, a big part of the mythology, a big part of the fun was who is really tougher. Now, we knew wrestling was worked. We knew it was it was predetermined, but, what if? What if Bill Goldberg and Steve Austin or whoever had a real match? Who would win? And that was, and there were oftentimes many people who, had their favorites. Oh, Steve Dr. Death Williams, he was the toughest wrestler. Or then there were the crossover guys like Dan Severn and Ken Shamrock, who certainly proved legitimacy in real fighting. And here they were in wrestling. People like Jack Briscoe had a reputation of bringing Luthez, certainly. Ed Strangler Lewis, even more so than everybody except the legitimate fighters. Throughout wrestling history, we've kind of wondered who the real tough guy is in this acted world. And the same thing went on with movies. I've often compared pro wrestling to action movies because it's literally the same thing. It is a scripted, choreographed act of a fight. Who would win between Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris or whatever? I don't know that wrestling fans even do that today. Is being a true tough guy even part of the interest of pro wrestling anymore? Because I think it's all just entertainment. I think fans today, and I'm not one of them, I do not watch current wrestling anymore. I say long, I'd say 10 years has passed me up, whereas whatever I got out of wrestling is enjoyment, which I think was the illusion of tough guys fighting with a paint coating of entertainment over the top. That's wonderful. I think it's changed totally. I think fans today are more interested in what their favorite stars are wearing, what they look like, their promos, which that's long been part of the deal, dating way back. Superstar Billy Graham, Buddy Rogers, all those were heavily popular because of their promos and stuff. But it's become that the entertainment, like it's a video game come to life now. And not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just that's not what I was originally invested in pro wrestling for. So it's interesting to see when you go back here. I see Jim Owens. His title reign wasn't very good. He outright refused to wrestle the person he won the belt from, Colonel James H. McLaughlin. And McLaughlin finally just gave up and retired and went to work on the railroad, although he comes back. And James Owens spent a lot of time wrestling his kinfolks, like Ed Cox. And even he hurt his foot at some point, and it appears he tried to get the American Championship on his brother Peter Owens, and that didn't come to fruition. And then he just picked up calling himself champion again. But his title reign was not that great. So he's a fascinating figure to me in pioneer wrestling history. He is one of the early American champions. He is part of pro wrestling's first family of wrestlers, with he and his cousins John McMahon and his brother Peter Owens and Ed Cox. They're all a family, and they're noteworthy historically because of those very reasons. December 25th, 1880, Christmas Day, New York City, New York, at Line Brewery Hotel Hall. Attendance 400. William Muldoon took on and defeated 3 men in succession. Louis DeBaugh beat him in 3 minutes. William's own brother, Martin Muldoon, also a wrestler. He beat his brother Martin in 10 minutes. Otto Brickenhoff, Louis' debut again, beat him in 5 minutes this time, and Martin Muldoon again, this time he beat him in 4 minutes. And this was a charity show for Michael Cavanaugh's family after he was killed falling from a railroad bridge. Now we go into 1881. So we're now into the 1880s, the 1870s, just quickly were dominated by Colonel James H. McLaughlin, winning the Detroit International Tournament and the American Collar and Elbow Championship, both back in 1870. John McMahon was super successful, as was Homer Lane, James Owens. And now we're up to there is sort of a changing of guard. William Muldoon is still coming up, and he will soon be the most important wrestler in the world. Clarence Whistler's on his way up. H.M. Doofer's been around for a while, but still he's very prominent at this time. Duncan C. Ross is also very prominent at this time and still has a great deal ahead. The Greco-Roman guys were very successful. Theobald Bauer, William Miller, Andre Cristal, of course, the many tales of Lucian Mark we've talked about. All that is about to change a little bit. It's about to go through a little bit of an evolution. January 6th, 1881. The American Championship belt belonging to H.M. Doofer is displayed at the Central Drug Store in Lynn, Massachusetts. And this is the first description I find of the American collar and elbow championship belt. Previously, Colonel James H. McLaughlin had won a belt, and even it wasn't the first belt. There's older belts than that, but it was the big belt. It was the main one. Won in that Detroit tournament. And we've had descriptions of it. Colonel James H. McLaughlin had displayed it many times. It was described in the newspapers. And at points in time, it had represented the American Collar and Elbow Championship. But now, apparently, by 1881, a belt specifically for the American Collar and Elbow Championship has been produced. And we know it's a different belt because it's described differently here in the paper. And this is what it says. The belt is described as handsome, with 7 pieces attached to a 3-foot belt with silver and gold wrought figures of athletes on it. Inscribed on the belt is won by H.M. Doofer at Fall River, December 3, 1880, and won by D.C. W. Duncan C. Ross at Belleville, Canada, 13th December 1879. The center of the belt said, Heavyweight Champion of America and British Provinces. Now, I have a Dragon King Karl note. I like all the I'm a deep dive wrestling nerd. It's never satisfied me just to know, this wrestler A versus wrestler B, who won, move along. I like all the trappings of it. I like to know the belts. I know there are many belt collectors out there, and while I don't have the finances to collect championship belts, I find them very interesting and have many of my favorites. I have one replica belt. It's right behind me as I record. It's the NWA Domed Globe, 10 pounds of gold world championship. The Ric Flair Harley Race belt from back in the 80s, 70s and 80s. And that's the only belt replica I have. But I love learning about that stuff. I love learning about the stuff that's even attached, centralized to wrestling. When I was promoting shows myself back in the 1990s, I grew up watching Continental Wrestling, Southeastern and Continental Wrestling, and we have a podcast about that at When It Was Cool that airs every Wednesday from Aaron Gartland called Southeastern Championship Wrestling Action U. So I hope that's another reason you can check out When It Was Cool. But as a fan, a super fan of that promotion, when I started promoting shows, I was running a show in Moulton, Alabama, and I was promoting a championship match between Gentleman Ken Timms and Hector Guerrero for my championship, but I didn't have a belt. And one of the wrestlers I booked on the show said, I've got a belt we can use, I'll bring it. And lo and behold, it was one of the old Continental Tag Team title belts. It was one of the last ones they had. I don't know where he got it. He was never a Continental wrestler, borrowed it, loaned it, stole it, I don't know, but that's I've always been fascinated by that sort of stuff. I remember at a wrestling convention one time I was giving a speech there for I forget what it even was, and I had one of the owners of the old AWA World Tag Team titles that the Road Warriors held, had those belts there, and I got to actually hold that belt and look at it and examine it and everything. That was really cool. Stuff like that was really fun for me as both a wrestling fan and collector. So here's the Dragon King Karl note. Dates have been the bane of my existence in researching and writing this book. I have endeavored to make everything as factually correct as possible. However, many historians, authors, and magazine writers prior to me, and even myself over the last 20 years, have based our research and dates on sources often written decades after the fact. The books from Milo Lundos and Fall Guys, for example, are often referenced yet riddled with misinformation. Here's another example. Someone in 1880 or 1881 had this belt inscribed with Duncan C. Ross winning it in Belleville, Canada on December 13th, 1879. This would suggest that this was the origin date for whatever this belt was being used for. Yet, in digging through the Belleville and surrounding area newspapers, I could find no such match. Duncan C. Ross was regularly wrestling J.C. Daly in mixed-style matches around this date, then leaving for Montreal and wrestling there. I'm assuming that the date inscribed was just incorrect, and it was instead meaning a date close to that or possibly against Captain J.C. Daly. So even the physical objects are sometimes the source of error. And maybe they knew what that date was. Maybe they that was the date the belt was created. I don't know. Who knows? But for whatever the reason is, the inscription on that belt, that match does not appear to have taken place on that date. So it's very interesting. January the 7th, 1881. Professor William Miller had disappeared from the U.S. newspapers some time back. We discover, by way of the Baltimore Sun, that he has returned to Australia and is wrestling there and issuing challenges to people to come there and wrestle him. And he stays down in Australia a good while. He's really the father of pro wrestling in Australia. He's going to be played very prominently into Clarence Whistler's story coming up, Donald Denny's story coming up. And he's not done it in the United States either. He'll be back. And remember, Professor William Miller, why is this even important? Who cares? Well, he, along with Professor Theobald Bauer, are responsible largely for popularizing Greco-Roman wrestling in the United States. They were both from the French circus. Greco-Roman wrestling was an entertainment style of wrestling. It's very roughly based on what you would know as Greco-Roman wrestling from like the Olympics and stuff. But they were the most important people in popularizing that, although William Muldoon's about to overtake them. So he is a very important person in the history of pro wrestling. January 12th, 1881, Lynn, Massachusetts, the Theater Comique, Duncan C. Ross defeated H.M. Dufer for $500 and the Championship Belt of America and the British provinces, 3 out of 5 falls in mixed style. So this is for that same belt we just talked about. Very interesting stuff here. You see how these championships are getting very convoluted. They're being promoted under different names, different people. John McMahon's still out there claiming to be champion as well. But we'll start to see. This has always been the case with wrestling. It's one of the things that makes wrestling really interesting is all these rival claims and stuff like that. You know, when I grew up watching wrestling in the 1980s, we had essentially 3 people in the United States calling themselves world champion. You had the WWF champion, who was, largely that time Hulk Hogan. You had the NWA world champion, who was, often Ric Flair, and the AWA world champion, often it was, Nick Botwinkle or Rick Martel or someone like that, Stan Hansen. So you had these competing world champions. Who was, and if somebody, in 150 years from now is doing research on this era, well, for one thing, records ought to be easier to find, but they too may be having debates about, if you were a fan, who would you choose? Who would be the, quote, true world champion to you? In my day growing up, I always felt like the NWA world title was the more prestigious of the championships, even though the WWF championship did the biggest business and whatever. Fans around Minnesota and Chicago and Denver, they may have argued the AWA. So that's a fun part of wrestling, is to discuss that sort of stuff. January 17th, 1881, Providence, Rhode Island, the Infantry Armory, a private match. The champion of America in the British provinces, Duncan C. Ross, defeated Captain J.C. Daly in a mixed-style 3 out of 5 falls match. Prize fighter Joe Goss was supposed to referee the match, but did not appear for fear of being arrested for recently being in a fight. Remember, these bare-knuckles fights were illegal in a lot of states. They were often, and this Joe Goss, we've talked about him a few times, and we'll talk about him more. He was very much entwined in the world of wrestling back then, as were several of the boxing champions going forward. January 19th, 1881, Brooklyn, New York, Turn Hall, attendance 500 people. Edwin Bibby defeated Duncan C. Ross, 3-2 in catch-as-catch-can. This match is generally recognized as being the beginning of the American Heavyweight Catch-as-Catch-Can Championship, with Bibby as the first champion. It was explained to the crowd during one fall of the match that unlike collar and elbow wrestling, catch-as-catch-can only required both shoulders to touch the mat, not both shoulders and a hip. It is also interesting that the newspapers follow up a few days later with an arrest stemming from this match. George Fitzgerald was arrested for stealing a silver watch from John McKenzie while the match took place. So pickpocketing going on during that. But here we have so we already have the oldest of the belts in America. When you say American heavyweight champion, you could be talking about three different things in the Pioneer era. The oldest of the American championships was the Collar and Elbow Championship. This one, Homer Lane, John McMahon, Colonel James H. McLaughlin, so on and so forth. Then you had the American Greco-Roman Championship, often called the World Greco-Roman Championship, and that's, your William Muldoon, Theobald Bauer, William Miller, those guys. Now you have the catch-as-catch-can, so that completes your three big American heavyweight championships. And the catch-as-catch-can championship will become very important as well. And here we have Edwin Bibby now as recognized by most historians the first champion. January 26, 1881, New York City, New York, Terrace Garden Theater, attendance 2,000 fans, although the Boston newspaper said the crowd was 1,000. World Greco-Roman champion, speaking of, William Muldoon, wrestled Clarence Whistler to a draw in Greco-Roman wrestling. The match went to a curfew at around 6 to 7 hours. The owner of the Terrace Garden turned off the gas lighting at 4 a.m., forcing the match to conclude. Neither man gained a fall. The New York Times stated that as long as William Muldoon was a member of the police force, he could not wrestle for money. And here I have a Dragon King Karl note in the book. The book, again, is Dragon King Karl's Pioneer Era Pro Wrestling Omnibus, available from Amazon. The story of William Muldoon and Clarence Whistler is a very interesting one, and I will have further notes about their volatile relationship as this book progresses. The Boston Globe followed up a few weeks later with a feature article about the match and the new tactic employed by Clarence Whistler. The article stated that Muldoon was exhausted and wrestling on defense for the last 3 hours. Whistler looked fresh. They owed it to a technique being used by Whistler called headwork, where Whistler kept his head pressed under Muldoon's chin and against his windpipe during the match, cutting Muldoon's airflow. Now, these Muldoon and Clarence Whistler are maybe among the most interesting rivalry partnership in the Pioneer era. We're going to see it go through a lot of changes. There are times that I can't read these reports, multiple reports, without thinking this William Muldoon Clarence Whistler match was real and on the level. This one being perhaps an example. Other times it's clear they're working together. They're flat out saying, hey, we're doing an exhibition. They would even do demonstrations between the falls and stuff. They worked together, but then they would part again. They had personal falling outs along the way. Sometimes they worked with each other. Sometimes they hated each other, and it's very interesting to watch their very complicated relationship go back and forth during the Pioneer era. All right, let's take our mid-show break. Come back. We'll jump into February of 1881 here on the 1,000 Hours podcast from whenitwascool.com. We'll be right back after this. Hey everybody, this is Karl Stern from whenitwascool.com. I'm here to tell you about my new book, now available, Dragon King Karl's Pioneer Era Pro Wrestling Omnibus, the Bible of the Pioneer Era of professional wrestling. Pro wrestling didn't start with Frank Gotch. He didn't just appear out of the void to bring us entertainment-style professional wrestling. No, it was built on a legacy some 70 to 80 years old. That's what I'm going to talk to you about, an era of wrestling in America seldom ever discussed, never before in this detail. I have put 700 pages of information about the pioneers of professional wrestling, like William Muldoon, Colonel James H. McLaughlin, Professor Theobald Bauer, Clarence Whistler, William Miller, and so many more. Maybe some names you've never heard of before, maybe some you've only heard in passing. I will tell you the origins and evolution. Now available, Amazon.com, whenitwascool.com. All right. One of the things we do at When It Was Cool as a bonus to our Patreon supporters is we do, many of our shows have an extended Patreon edition, and this is no different. If you're listening to this at Wrestling Observer, Figure 4 Online, or one of our free feeds at whenitwascool.com, once that show ends, the Patreon version continues. So if you're on Patreon, one of our Patreon supporters, you'll get an extra segment as well. And I hope you'll consider doing that. One thing I seldom mention on these shows, because it's so important, the most important way to keep these shows going and our website going is to become a Patreon supporter. But I also often fail to mention, we have an eBay store as well. A lot of times there's wrestling memorabilia, merchandise up on there, as well as pop culture and retro pop culture. So go to whenitwascool.com. Hey, just bookmark that page. Check us out on eBay and certainly our Patreon. So we're going to go into February of 1881 now. Specifically, February 18th, 1881, Brooklyn, New York, at Turn Hall. Attendance 500 people. The American Collar and Elbow champion, Edwin Bibby, defeated Captain J.C. Daly 3 falls to 2. And that should actually say, instead of collar and elbow champion, it should actually say the catch-can champion there. Sorry about that. February, and this is the reason these audio shows work well. February 19th, 1881, Peoria, Illinois. Rose's Opera House, Charlie Flynn defeated Lucian Mark Cristal. Yes, Lucian Mark is now going by Lucian Mark Cristal. 3 out of 5 falls in Greco-Roman. Also on February 19th, 1881, Boston, Massachusetts at Music Hall, Clarence Whistler defeated Professor Theobald Bauer, 2 out of 3 falls. The entire match lasted only about 20 minutes. And on that same day, Montpelier, Vermont, a lot of wrestling happening here. In February 1881, Montpelier, Vermont, Whitney's Opera House, G.W. Flagg wrestled Ed Decker to a draw in collar and elbow. March 2nd, 1881, New York City, New York, the old post office building. William Muldoon defeats Edwin Bibby in Greco-Roman. And I got a lot of notes for this one, so this is seemingly pretty important. The match was supposed to start at 3 o'clock p.m., but Muldoon was not able to leave the New York Police Department until 6 p.m., and we'll find out it's because they were messing with him. They did not want William Muldoon wrestling. They've threatened him repeatedly, stop taking wrestling matches or you're going to be fired. He had this, and a lot of this stems, I believe, because of the Police Athletic League that he helped found. And he and some of the other people that founded it became at odds with each other, almost certainly over money. And they ended up, William Muldoon was beat down by Miller and another police officer in a street fight. So it's a wonder that he hasn't been fired already. But here they're going to try to force him out. So they do this on purpose. A near riot took place due to the delay. However, when Muldoon arrived, he gave a speech saying that he was being mistreated by the police department because of his wrestling ambitions, and he was purposely detained from 3 p.m. when he expected to leave until 6 p.m. Following the event, Muldoon joined Richard K. Fox, which was Muldoon's financial backer and, of course, the guy who owned and published the National Police Gazette magazine. He joined Richard K. Fox at Sullivan's Oyster Saloon. Later in the night, Edwin Bibby came in and took a table. Muldoon overheard Bibby's group saying something about him, and he walked over to confront Edwin Bibby. Muldoon expressed gratitude for Bibby waiting on Muldoon to get off duty to wrestle, but suggested that Bibby was unhappy at the outcome of the match. Bibby said he thought he could easily beat Muldoon and catch a can. Muldoon said he would accept, and his backer, Richard K. Fox, said he would put up the money. Edwin Bibby was instructed to come to Fox's office the next day and sign articles of agreement, but Bibby did not show up. And here's a Dragon King Carl note for this. When you research as many newspapers as I have in chronological succession, you begin to notice trends. Since William Muldoon, Edwin Bibby, H.M. Duffer, and Duncan C. Ross have replaced Colonel James H. McLaughlin, John McMahon, Professor Theobald Bauer, and Professor William Miller as the, quote, top names. The newspapers have less and less called pro wrestling fake or put-up jobs. That doesn't necessarily mean they were legitimate. In fact, the Cincinnati Enquirer called this match a Barney or a prearranged match. But largely since Muldoon's brand of Greco-Roman has replaced the Bauer-Miller brand of Greco-Roman, the newspapers have been a little less critical of wrestling, at least for the moment. Now we go to March 7th, 1881, Boston, Massachusetts, Music Hall, attendance 2,000 people. Edwin Bibby defeated Clarence Whistler in catch-as-catch-can, 3 out of 5 falls. March the 8th, 1881, in Hanover, New Hampshire, Union Village, G.W. Flagg defeated W.J. Carney, great name for a wrestler, in collar and elbow. March the 18th, 1881, also in Hanover, New Hampshire. We have any New Hampshire listeners? Like, I never think about New Hampshire as a state. Like, you would think, like, New Jersey. I would never think about New Jersey, but I find myself thinking about New Jersey. I don't know why. I've never even been. But New Hampshire, like, okay, I can find it on a map. I'm real good at geography, but I don't know that I've ever actually met a human being from New Hampshire. It's kind of like Milwaukee, Wisconsin. These places really exist because I've never actually met a human being from either Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or New Hampshire. I don't know. But apparently, whether New Hampshire's real or not, G.W. Flagg and W.J. Carney wrestled there, and the next day they swapped, just changed. The W.J. Carney beat G.W. Flagg. And G.W. Flagg, make no mistake, is one of the he's one of the undersung stars of the Pioneer era. I mean, he did a lot more than he's ever really remembered for. March the 22nd, 1881, New York City, New York, Terrace Garden Theater, attendance between 300 and 400 people. William Muldoon wrestled John McMahon to a draw, swapping 1 fall each. So this is, big stars in this one. Greco-Roman, Muldoon wins in 5 minutes. The collar and elbow, McMahon won. Catch-as-catch-can was called a draw when the referee called it off because McMahon and Muldoon could not agree on a jacket for the match. Remember, we've talked about these jackets and harnesses before, and some wrestlers liked them and some didn't. William Muldoon refused to wrestle in a jacket, but later put one on, but altered it by tearing out the arms. McMahon refused to wrestle him with a torn jacket. So you see, Muldoon's not having any of this jacket business. The New York Evening Gazette said, quote, the match between Muldoon and McMahon was called a draw after 15 minutes of wrestling and 2 hours of talking. The match was for a medal in mixed-style wrestling offered by a sporting newspaper, the National Police Gazette, of course, and Muldoon's money backer, Richard K. Fox. Since the Edwin Bibby match, Muldoon has quit the police force over their constant interference with his wrestling. So Muldoon's no longer encumbered with the New York Police Department. He can wrestle as much as he likes, and he will do so. Now, Muldoon's career wasn't very long. Really only about 10 competitive years. And the latter of those years were marked with inactivity due to nagging injuries. But boy, did he leave a mark on wrestling. I mean, he is the face of the Pioneer era to most people. Now, I would argue Colonel James H. McLaughlin and John McMahon and Evan Strangler Lewis, all should be up there too. But when most people, if they know any name from the Pioneer era, it's William Muldoon. So it was quite a good use of his time, and we're about to see, him do that. It's really going to pick up now that the police department's out of the picture. March 24th, 1881, St. Alban, Vermont, Vero Small, along with 3 others, is arrested for assaulting Daniel Prince by dragging him out of bed and beating him up. Small pled not guilty and demanded a jury trial. While I could not find a result of the trial, undoubtedly Small was either found not guilty or did very little time in jail, as he was soon competing in foot races around Vermont. And Vero Small, Black Sam, is one of the earliest successful African-American wrestlers and a boxer as well. So you may have saw, and look, he wasn't the only one. We saw, before him, there was the guy, Thompson, I think was his name, who Oozle Prickett wrestled and lost the American Championship to down in Nashville, Tennessee, and caused a big ruckus there with a hippodrome match. But Vero Small, he's going to be a very well-known name. You can still find books about Vero Small to this day. March 26, 1881, Hanover, New Hampshire, G.W. Flagg beat W.J. Carney in collar and elbow. March the 31st, 1881, Brooklyn, New York at Turn Hall, attendance 200 people. Clarence Whistler defeated H.M. Duffer 3-1 in Catch-a-Sketch-Can, and was feared that Duffer's arm was broken in the match, but it was discovered only to have been sprained. Clarence Whistler submitted Duffer with an arm lock, and the referee, Harry Hill, yes, Harry Hill, the early original Vince McMahon of pro wrestling, from right there in Brooklyn, New York, accepted his submission, saying that he could not continue. April 11th, 1881, a story runs in the Philadelphia Times about the feud between P.T. Barnum, yes, of the famous Barnum and Bailey Circus, greatest showman, the whole deal, P.T. Barnum and Adam Forepaugh, who both run entertainment shows. You've probably heard of the Forepaugh Circus as well. The newspaper says it paid to see P.T. Barnum's show, which featured a wrestling match, although it does not say who was wrestling, and compared P.T. Barnum negatively to Harry Hill, saying a prominent feature of the show was a wrestling match, which only lacked a dog fight to make it an equal show to his neighbor Harry Hill on Houston Street in Murderers Row. P.T. Barnum is running ads for his circus in many newspapers with prominent drawings of wrestlers, but the ads do not identify who they are. And these are some of the earliest depictions of wrestlers in American newspapers. At this point in time, photography was not at all widespread. You would periodically find engravings in the paper where an artist had made a drawing. And here, these are the ones that I included it in my book there. One of the earliest ones was this P.T. Barnum sketch it run in many newspapers with these unidentified wrestlers on it. So if you want to see that, check out the book. The photo of it's in there. April the 12th, 1881, Boston, Massachusetts, the City Council again votes to ban both wrestling and boxing. Boston tried many times over the years to do that. May the 7th, 1881, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Clarence Whistler defeated William Muldoon in a mixed-style match. Muldoon won the Greco-Roman fall, and the next two were Catch-a-Sketch-Can, won by Clarence Whistler. May the 11th. So, look, here's an example. Many people erroneously, I don't know why, it was never really pushed this way. Many people thought that William Muldoon was undefeated in his wrestling career. No, William Muldoon lost many matches in his wrestling career. A lot of them were worked matches. He was, designed to lose. And many of them were exhibitions that weren't even supposed to be taken seriously to begin with. They were more demonstrative matches. And we're going to get into that era pretty soon where Muldoon's doing that. But no, Muldoon lost his fair share. Now, he never lost the World Greco-Roman Championship. He did keep that championship, but he did business. And he did good business, too, in a lot of places. May the 11th, 1881, Cleveland, Ohio. At the Armory Hall, attendance 1,200 people. William Muldoon wrestled Clarence Whistler to a draw in an exhibition match. There were just two falls, with Muldoon winning the Greco-Roman and Whistler winning the Catch-a-Sketch-Can fall. After the match, both men did some strongman demonstrations. And that was, we've talked about it. As part of these larger entertainment shows, this was not out of the ordinary. May the 12th, 1881, the papers announced that William Muldoon will be touring the United States and Canada giving exhibitions. So here it begins. This is going to be William Muldoon with this exhibition tour, which goes on for a long time. Noticeably changes the perception of Greco-Roman wrestling in America. And it's pretty brilliant what he did. He, instead of going out and doing these put-up jobs or these hippodromes or the newspaper saying fakes or blarneys or all these different words that had been created by the media to explain a predetermined wrestling match, Muldoon decides just to circumvent all that. He's not going to put on wrestling matches. He's going to put on demonstrations, exhibitions. I remember we used to do this when I was in karate back, as a teenager. We would do different demonstrations to get people to sign up for the school. You'd go to a school or a little summer fair or something like that, and the school would put on demonstration. We do the goofy stuff like breaking boards and blocks and katas and forms and all this other nonsense that But still, that was the reason. And we weren't telling people, hey, we're going to have a legit karate fight in the middle of Main Street here. It was for demonstrative purposes, which is what William Muldoon's going to do, and that changes everything. The newspapers really slow down even more in calling wrestling fake. They start to view it as an educational endeavor. Even the class of people move over. It's you still got the gamblers and stuff going in there, but a lot more finely dressed people who are there just for the informational purposes. Remember, this Victorian era, was that was one of the big movements was intellectualism. Let's learn as much as we can about as much stuff as science was, really learned by a lot of people. There was a lot of interest in other places, different continents, and this was just another way of getting into physical culture for people who weren't necessarily, athletes themselves. So he did a real good job that greatly cleaned up the reputation of wrestling for a while. May the 19th, 1881, Cleveland, Ohio, at the Armory, 200 people. William Muldoon defeated Clarence Whistler, 2 falls, Greco-Roman, 1 fall, catch can, with Whistler winning in catch. The match was more of an exhibition and demonstration than a match, with explanation of the holds and throws being explained along the way. It was announced that Muldoon and Whistler were now headed to Detroit. So Muldoon does business with Clarence Whistler, and Clarence Whistler does business with Muldoon, and they travel around. They're going to go all over the country. And what they do, they have this match, and then when one gets a successful hold on the other and executes it, they stop the match, explain what happened there, how this was done. You can see how that would be very interesting to people who maybe don't have any direct interest in a sport, but had read about these characters in the paper. That it was, of course, Greco-Roman was glorified as the great, sport of the ancestors. This is what Zeus and Hercules and all these people were doing, the ancient Roman Olympics. This is what we're doing. We're bringing it back. We're showing the matches in this new, the masses in this new cultural age. What the ancient Romans did. Many of them newspaper articles used that type language. And, you're sitting at home, 1881, you don't have television, radio, you don't have anything like that. You have the local opera house. And what entertainment's available down there? You don't necessarily go just for a wrestling match. You go to, there's going to be a play. There's going to be an orchestra there. There's going to be a magic show, or there's going to be some sort of scientific exhibition, or there's going to be a physical culturist exhibition or wrestling or something like that. And that's, why people were coming to these shows to begin with. It was the entertainment of the time. May 23rd, 1881, the William Muldoon and Clarence Whistler exhibition show comes to Detroit, Michigan. Not only are they giving exhibitions in Greco-Roman and catch-as-catch-can wrestling, but also offering $50 to anyone who can throw Muldoon and Greco-Roman, or $50 to anyone who could beat Whistler in catch. The newspaper said the event was poorly attended owing to other shows at the same night, and Clarence Whistler defeated William Muldoon 2 falls in catch to 1 in Greco-Roman. So they do add this take-on-all-comers gimmick, which seldom was actually taken upon. It was more of just a way of sort of an aspect of kayfabe. We'll show you, if you believe this is all, if this isn't legitimate, we'll offer $50 to any of you who can beat Muldoon and Greco-Roman. There were a few takers along the way, but nobody really successful. And it also helped keep the legitimacy, or the presentation of legitimacy, that they were trying to do. March 24th, 1881, we have at Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, John Clark's Sparring Hall, attendance full house. The money had to be refunded, as Johnson, unknown first name, was to wrestle John McMahon for the American Collar and Elbow Championship. However, McMahon had an attack of rheumatism in his ankle and could not stand up. And I have here a Dragon King Carl note for this. Though John McMahon had a long career, it was plagued from the 1880s on with occasional bouts of rheumatism. McMahon would often have to take off extended periods of time due to his ankle problem. So while he's still a big name, one of the biggest names, he's peaked. I mean, he's peaked, and Colonel McLaughlin is about to return also. So this first generation you have of really, well-known national star pro wrestlers has cycled down. Muldoon and his ilk have cycled up, Duncan C. Ross and people like that, H.M. Doofer, but McLaughlin's about to come back and be, a handful. May 25th, 1881, matter of fact, San Francisco, California, Mechanics Hall. Tom Fox defeated Homer Lane in collar and elbow wrestling, billed as an exhibition and part of a larger athletics show. May 29th, 1881, after being absent from the papers for months, Colonel James H. McLaughlin returns with a challenge to John McMahon or H.M. Doofer to wrestle him in Detroit for $2,000 in the Championship of America in collar and elbow. He has been working as a train conductor for the Michigan Central Railroad. Of course, we know he comes and goes with that conductor job. June 15th, 1881, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Clark's Boxing Academy. Attendance 100 people. John McMahon wrestled John McGillick to a no contest. The referee shut down the match and refunded the money to the crowd. The referee and establishment owner, Mr. Clark, announced to the crowd that he had discovered the match was a fraud. McMahon and McGillick had made a private agreement between each other that McMahon would throw McGillick 2 falls to 1, and Mr. Clark announced he would not be part of a fraud. He then challenged John McMahon to fight him before leaving. So, this promoter didn't know what he was signing up for when he got this. He's like, we're going to have us some real wrestling down here at Clark's Boxing Academy for the 100 of you who showed up. And, I wonder if it was disappointment over just the attendance or whatever, if he was in on it too. I don't know. But it seems like he was shocked by this. June the 23rd, 1881, Peoria, Illinois, Academy of Music. Andre Cristal defeated Faye, unknown first name, 2 out of 3 falls in Greco-Roman. 2 more notes for this portion of the show, and then we'll take a break for our Patreons. Our Patreons will come back and do an extended cut for you. We won't do any more of the timeline, so you don't have to worry about that. We'll keep that chronology intact, but we'll discuss some other matters with our Patreon. June the 24th, 1881, Duncan C. Ross is sentenced to 60 days in jail in Providence, Rhode Island for assaulting a man. I was unable to find many other details about the case, so I don't know who he assaulted, why he assaulted them, or the circumstances. It was just a note in there that he's going to have to spend 2 months in jail. June the 28th, 1881, St. Albans, Vermont, Armory Hall, attendance 300 people. Ed Decker defeated John Callan in a collar and elbow for the middleweight championship. Remember, these lighter weight championships, periodically we'll discover a lightweight championship, middleweight championship, etc. None of these really seem to have any lasting power. I mean, some of them a little bit, but none of them really seem to have any draw potential. And we've seen that historically be the case. UFC Ultimate Fighting, I think, is one of the few combat sports where your lighter weight championships have sometimes been as popular or more popular than the heavyweight one. And you could even make an argument there's been times in boxing where that was the case. But I don't think in pro wrestling ever has there been a time, even with Danny Hodge and people like that, where the junior heavyweight championship was considered superior to the world heavyweight championship. So it's interesting there. All right, so we're going to wrap it up here for our regular edition of the show. Patreons, hang on after the break. We'll be back and talk a little more. For everybody else, thank you so much. I hope you will support us at whenitwascool.com by becoming a Patreon member. When you do that, I will dedicate an hour of this show for you or to you. If you'd like to sponsor an episode of this show and not become a Patreon, we have 2 links on the front of the page, PayPal or Cash App, minimum of $10, but you can go as much. We've had people go $100 on these, and we really appreciate it, and it's great for our business. Thank you so much, and thank you all for supporting us. Look, business has picked back up here lately, and I'm very happy to announce that. Book sales have been going very good for Dragon King Karl's Pioneer Era Pro Wrestling Omnibus. I have 2 other omnibus books besides that, the 1983 book, and then the 1984-85 omnibus, all of those available both in physical form and on Kindle from Amazon. So hope you'll check that out. And I will see you here again soon from whenitwascool.com.
Whenitwascool.com is your source for the best in retro pop culture. When It Was Cool features articles and podcasts on retro TV and movies, toys, action figures, pro wrestling, food, video games, and more. Hit the Patreon button to support us and get instant access to hundreds of premium podcasts and features. Family friendly and fun. Whenitwascool.com.